Hey everyone, this is Kalegi with Tim Moore reminding you that SportsSpeak is now powered by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the one-stop shop for tickets to sporting events, concerts, and so much more.
Use the promo code SportsSpeak at checkout for $20 off your first purchase.
SeatGeek, let there be live. Now, on to the show. How's it going, everybody? Hope you're enjoying the start of June, and welcome to another episode. Edition number 177 of SportsSpeak Live, as always, powered by SeatGeek. Use the promo code SportsSpeak, all caps, one word, $20 off your first online purchase. Feels like a pretty good deal to me. I'm Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Since it is June, that means NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals. They're both going to be kicking off this week. We'll be previewing that. Some Major League Baseball, the Yankees, Aaron Judge and Juan Soto doing some things that haven't been done since Ruth and Gehrig. We're going to talk about that. And on the NASCAR front, the greatest weekend in racing. I know we usually cover that with Motorsports Today. I need to get Tim's take right here. The waiver has been granted to Kyle Larson. I'm a big fan of it. He isn't. We're going to discuss. But let's start on the ice quickly. Stanley Cup Finals coming up. Florida Panthers get past the New York Rangers. And I know, Tim, on this show, you have been harping for years about you don't care which team it is. You just want to see a New York championship. You're getting over it. Okay.
I'm trying to get over it.
You're trying.
If I've never seen somebody more devastated than any person in the world, to be honest with you, the other day, it was Miniker. Because not just because he's a Rangers fan, it's the thought of the fact that all you've heard all year long is that this team has it. It has the possibility. It has the capabilities. And for the Rangers, and it's funny because I was coming back from the Charlotte trip on Tuesday, okay? For the Rangers to lose exactly the way I called it to happening to the Panthers back in game number, 5 at that point, 5 or 6, whichever it was, the one where they lost an OT. It's really funny because I think of it like this. The Panthers this season, what has been interesting about them is that they have very good goaltending play, despite the fact that they're one of the most heaviest, if not the second most heaviest, penalized teams in the NHL. And when you look at that, that shows how good they are defensively. But in this Rangers series in particular, what impressed me about the Panthers is just so how dominant they were on the power plays. And the Rangers, they battled, they take an early lead, and it's immediately, boom, penalty. Panthers tie it up. Rangers get another lead. Boom, penalty, tied up. And eventually they lose it, in which I predicted the Miniker. I'm like, they're gonna get penalized in OT and they'll lose on a power play. And that's ultimately what the Rangers did. But the point is this. You are seeing the Panthers mesh together when it matters. But not to, give the full other side, right? But when we're talking about the Oilers, a team that they're going to face in the Stanley Cup, the Oilers have been everything that you can imagine is a dominant hockey franchise that somehow has not won a Stanley Cup in recent memory. You have two of the best players in the NHL, that being Connor McDavid, and I don't even know how to pronounce the other dude's last name. What is it? Friedel? What is it?
Draisaitl?
Draisaitl. Thank you. I'm sorry. The whole point is that's two of the top 3 forwards in the NHL. Connor McDavid is spectacular. If you ever get to watch him on the ice, he's incredible. And you talk about the Panthers being successful, right? What I'm worried about, not to jump exactly to the Stanley Cup, because I know you asked me about the Rangers, but what makes me worried about the Panthers is that knowing that they are a very penalty-prone team, how can you do that against the best team in power play percentage and the team that dominated shooting percentage this year of the Oilers? I can't see that happening. And again, I know the Panthers are very, very good defensively in net. I think team-wise, the team was the second best save percentage of the year and second get goals allowed per game. They're only averaging about 2.5 goals per game, which is pretty strong in the postseason. And as we know, we talk about it when we talk about NHL on the show. And if you guys follow the NHL, you will know goalies and good goaltender play will win you championships. But when when you're talking about a franchise that desperately wants a Stanley Cup, when you're talking about a country that desperately hasn't had a Stanley Cup since 1993, that's 21 years if you're counting, you're going to have some desperation. And just like how you saw with Knicks fans, let's say, bombarding away arenas because they couldn't really afford to go to the Garden, and that's not exactly the case in Canada, but you found faith and MSG gets packed out and it feels like a home game. I would imagine if you're going to Edmonton, that arena is going to be packed because you may never see a Stanley Cup for a long time again, the way it works out. I mean, again, 1993, the Canadians were the last team to do it. The Oilers are something special. And when you look at that roster, when, again, I don't want to make this comparison, but when you have the Mike Trout of hockey out there and he's actually being successful, you don't know if Connor McDavid's ever going to make it to a Stanley Cup Finals again. So for me, if you live in Canada, I don't care what team you root for, just like me, right? I'm a New Yorker. I may not be a Rangers fan, but I want to see a championship back in this state again. You should be rooting for the Oilers, regardless of what team you support, because it means something to that country if they can win a Stanley Cup.
It really does. And such a rich history of hockey north of the border. And so many times we've seen these teams get chances to win. I mean, the Canucks have been there twice. The Canadians were there a couple of years ago. The Oilers in 05-06, and all those teams lost. And this really feels like the opportunity. I wouldn't call Connor McDavid the Mike Trout of hockey, though, because he's proven he can actually make it to a championship. I'd consider Austin Matthews. Austin Matthews is the Mike Trout of hockey because the Leafs aren't going anywhere. But, this is an interesting series. The Rangers, once again, it proves just because you win the President's Cup does not mean you're destined for greatness. And hockey playoffs, while, a much longer format and a much less scrutinized format, produces a lot of the same results as Major League Baseball currently does now, because just because you're really good in the regular season, it doesn't necessarily translate to postseason play. Just ask the Boston Bruins basically the last 3 seasons, and the Rangers once again, incredible year, but they fall flat against a Florida team that knows how to win when it gets warmer out. And Matt Tkachuk, of course, is the star on that team, but you got to talk about Bobby in goal too. He's been arguably the best keeper in the postseason. But this Edmonton team, it's going to be tough with McDavid and Draisaitl. Should be a fun series and a lot of travel involved. You mentioned, maybe fans trying to go to opposing arenas. That's quite the trip. It's a 7-hour plane ride from Edmonton to Miami. So we'll see what happens with that, but should be a fun series. Let's go to the NBA. Boston and Dallas again, North versus South, Celtics and Mavs. We did our NBA playoff preview a couple months ago, and me and Poach especially were high on the Mavs. Poach actually had the Mavs going all the way to the finals. I had them in the conference finals, but this duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, clearly a recipe for success right now for the Lone Star State. And I mean, the Mavs have just been ridiculous this postseason. Luka Doncic, that game a couple days ago where he's talking out Snoop Dogg and everything, that was the emergence of someone who is becoming the face of the NBA. Nikola Jokic might be the best player. Anthony Edwards might have the highest potential, but Luka Doncic, in my opinion, is becoming the face of this league, and he can further enforce that point with a championship this year. And Kyrie Irving, love him or hate him, I'm more with the latter, but you can't deny his greatness on the basketball court. And that duo has worked out to an impeccable level. Jason Kidd is doing just enough coaching, and they have the ancillary support on that team. Derek Lively, as a rookie, has been the 3rd best rookie this year, only behind Wemby and Chet. PJ Washington, great addition for that roster as well. But now you face a tough challenge in the Boston Celtics. And Tim, I think this might be the most compelling storyline for an NBA Finals, maybe since the Cleveland Golden State years, because you have this Celtics team that's been there once, and at this point, if they lose another one, really feels like a missed opportunity, because Philly and Milwaukee were both hampered this year with injuries. This was a year you had to capitalize. This is when you had the best record. Tatum and Brown are an elite duo. You also have the storyline of Kyrie Irving against his old team. Kristaps Porzingis will be healthy for game 1 against his old team. And how about Luka Doncic? A chance to win an NBA title in just his 5th season would be massive for him. what are your expectations for this series, which I think is going to be very competitive, despite the fact that Boston had the best record this year?
I think it's going to be very, very competitive. But what is crazy to think about the Mavs, real quick, Eddie, is that if you looked at this roster back in 2021-22 when Porzingis was on that team, right? I would argue that the roster for the Mavs were better then, but yet they weren't successful. And yet here they are now finding ways to be competitive, 3 years later to this point, and making changes. And yes, Kyrie Irving, to be honest with you, the duo with him and Luka really reminds me of him and LeBron back in Cleveland, which you mentioned. This is the first compelling series really since then. What impresses me about the Mavericks is that I'm going to be honest with you. When you look at that starting five, let's be honest, it's not the most dominant starting five. The Celtics have, if you look at starting fives, the Celtics arguably have the best starting five throughout the entire league in terms of what you're seeing from consistency standpoints. But what impresses me about Dallas is that when you go to that bench, you're finding constant double-digit producers and points. You're finding constant players that are role players that step up when it matters. And when you have that, it allows your best players to have off days and allows other guys to step up and get used to situations. It's the complete opposite, for example, not to go back to the New York Knicks, but it's the complete opposite of what Coach Thibodeau was doing with the Knicks, right? Of, hey, I have my 6, 7 guys. I'm going to burn them out, have them go out there. And then once we get to a guy that needs to step up in the clutch, they don't have the experience. It's either they sink or they swim. To see that out of the Mavericks and see production all around is what's going to make this very interesting, because Boston, again, we talk about it every series. We've talked about it all year long. This Boston team has production between Tatum and Brown very, very consistently. But this team also has a lot of size, and it's very, very unique. And I just don't know what to think, because, again, it's either size versus productivity. And at the start of the season, let's be honest, nobody circled the Mavs to be in the championship. I think everybody circled them to be in the playoff picture, but not everybody circled them to be in the championship picture. But everybody had Boston circled. But if there's anything that we have learned about the NBA now over the last 3-4 years since starting this show, it is expect the unexpected. And yet again, here we are with the unexpected. The Dallas Mavericks are playing in the NBA Finals for a championship. And while more often than not, the underdog has prevailed, it's going to be a tough, tough task. And to finish it like this, Eddie, to be honest with you, I don't care who wins the championship. For Boston, it means a lot more because you've been here so many times that you're running out of time to do it. Just like you're the Dodgers, or dare I say, every Philly team in existence. But overall, you got to do it now or you'll never have a chance to do it again. But the NBA is about its biggest stars winning championships, its most valuable players creating value. And if you're Luka Doncic, and of course Kyrie Irving already has proven, regardless of how you feel about him being a star, you're going to find a way to win when it matters. So I think this is a series that is destined for 7 games. But at the end of the day, this is a game of stars, and the stars align for the Dallas Mavericks. The only thing that stinks for me personally is it comes on a year where right after Mark Cuban left them. Think about it. Because he's got to be kicking himself knowing that team now is in the NBA Finals and he's not going to be right up in front to see it, to celebrate it.
Oh, well, he'll still be there. He's still got his seat every game, but he doesn't have the financial stake that he once did. But he can still take solace in the fact that he orchestrated some of the moves that were there, and I assume he's going to get some sort of financial compensation. But then again, he doesn't even need it. He's a millionaire, but he'll be there. He'll still be there in the front row cheering him on. But yeah, a couple points I want to add to that. Number one, let's not forget how much of a free fall last season was for Dallas. They trade for Kyrie. They're the 4th seed at that moment, and they end up missing the playoffs, not just the postseason, didn't even get in the play-in. They fell to the 11th seed, and they basically tanked the last 2 weeks of the season when they realized they had no chance. And all of a sudden this year, they're rejuvenated. That's the first point I want to make. Number two, I want to get your thoughts on this. We were talking about this on WRSU, the Rutgers student radio station, the other day. One of my colleagues brought up the point that the Celtics would have had a better chance in this series, and not saying that they're not going to win, but they'd be in a better position going into this series if they had actually played against a high quality team at full strength in the playoffs. And I think you can go two ways here. You can say, yeah, they haven't been tested yet. They've played against the Heat, the Cavs, and the Pacers, and all three of those teams lost their best player midway through the series: Jimmy Butler, Donovan Mitchell, Tyrese Halliburton. At the same time, though, you can say, hey, Celtics haven't had to expend that much energy. They've been in the finals before. They know what it takes. They went up against a prime Golden State team that was elite, and they've only gotten better now with Porzingis and Derek White in the mix. They have 8 guys scoring in double figures sometimes. So, I want to see which side of the coin you're on here. Do you think the Celtics are in a better position or a worse position because of how easy their Eastern Conference one was?
You know, I'm very down the middle on that, to be honest with you, because when we talk about other sports, right? How, for example, yeah, it's great and all that. Let's say you get a first round bye when we talk about the NFL, right? And then teams come out slow out of the gate to start their divisional games. Or when you talk about teams that play in the wild card round in Major League Baseball and find themselves advancing, to the ALDS or NLDS and so on, that you start seeing those teams kind of create a little bit of mojo and momentum. Of course, the NBA playoffs, everybody plays at the same time, but not really having the best of competition for Boston does kind of hurt a little bit because of the fact that, like you mentioned, they're not battle tested, and that's the downside of it. They're not fully battle tested. You only have your regular season games. The positive side is, though, they're healthy, right? They've had rest, and that's the perk. But it comes down to the fact of, what do you see game one? How do you see them coming out in the series? Because once they have their backs against the wall, that's the only way we can tell if this Boston team is serious or not serious. And that's the real reality of it. I feel for the Celtics. They've been the top team all season long. Everybody's talked about them. You have to go through this team. Let's be honest, they have nothing to prove other than winning the championship. Nobody counted Dallas in. Nobody thought the Mavs were going to do it until they got there. To me, the Mavs have a lot more to prove and a lot more point to prove. And again, motivation means something. So to answer your question overall, Eddie, I feel that, again, I feel down the middle, but I do feel that the Celtics are in a worse position because when you're rested and you may not fully feel motivated and you don't show that coming out to start a series, let's say, they could be in a lot of trouble because once you get in a hole early, you may not come back out of it. That's the reality of it. So they're going to have to prove that they're the better basketball team, and on paper they absolutely are. But again, I can't emphasize this enough about the NBA and what we've seen in playoff history as well as finals history. There's a lot of times the best team doesn't win. It's the team that has better stars. Again, LeBron hasn't gone to so many finals and hasn't gone to so many playoff runs, practically carrying a franchise on his back, back when he was with Cleveland, without being a superstar. To be at the top level of the NBA, you need to be a superstar. Don't get me wrong, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are that, but they're not Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. So again, I expect the Mavs to win this series in 7. I actually do. But for Boston, again, you've got to win it. You just have to, because then you're going to regress. You're stuck, and you don't want to be that franchise that's stuck and feels like you've been around the mix, because then you feel like the team I support, the New York Yankees, where you're constantly talked about being the favorite, but yet you can't find a way to get it done when it matters, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, well, I will say I feel like the best team has won the last few years in the NBA, but I do agree with your point. We've seen some surprises. I mean, especially in the conference, brackets, Miami making it to the finals twice. But when it's been all said and done, I'd argue the Nuggets were the most complete team in the NBA last year. The Warriors 2 years ago, with the way they stayed healthy and with the addition of Andrew Wiggins and what he provided as a spark to that team that year, you could argue they were the best team. And the Lakers, the bubble year, regardless of whether you want to say it's a Mickey Mouse ring or not, they were 50-15 when the pandemic hit. They were clearly elite, and that team had a good mix. So we'll see what happens. NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals, both kicking off this week. You mentioned the Yankees. We talked a lot about the Mets, me and Zoe, almost 20 minutes last episode. Don't want to get into them. I saved some Yankees talk for you because they're 42-19. They're tied for the best record in baseball. This is the same team that you told me, quote, was going to be a disaster this year. Well, it clearly hasn't been the case because the rotation is just fine. Garrett Cole isn't even pitched an inning yet, and they've been fine. Luis Gil has become one of the best pitchers in the American League this year. The bullpen is serviceable enough, but it's the offense. I mean, Aaron Judge, after hitting 170 through the first 3 weeks, has been the best player in baseball for the last month and a half. And maybe the second best player is his teammate Juan Soto, which once again, I don't see any way that he's not a Yankee for the next 10 years. There is no way the Yankees let him walk in free agency and don't offer him the money because the Yankees have the money to spend. And I don't see what reason Juan Soto would have to leave. So I know you're hypercritical of this team, but can you at least be happy about them right now? They're 42-19 and might have the two best players in the league hitting back to back in that order.
Yeah, no, Juan Soto has changed a lot of my perception of at least this season. Don't get me wrong, I still don't exactly have faith in Brian Cashman, but that doesn't mean I don't have faith in his team. What I'm emphasizing, though, moving forward is that, listen, you'd argue, you said Aaron Judge may be the most valuable player that we've seen this season. And don't get me wrong, he had a very good last month, winning AL Player of the Month. But Juan Soto has been a consistent for this team that the Yankees have needed. And if you watch the show here in Sports Speak, one thing that I have preached about multiple times about if you want to be a successful ball club and you want to win a World Series, you need somebody to hit 300 and you need another hitter that can produce just around that number. For the last few years, Aaron Judge has been that guy for the New York Yankees, but there's been no one else around him healthy enough to do it. Juan Soto has come out right off the gate. He's been nothing but consistent. I think it's a 321, 320. It's over 300. That's the point for Juan Soto. And he is producing long ball after long ball, not as much as Aaron Judge, but he's producing it. And the last time we talked about the Yankees, I said, this is exactly what Yankees fans dreamed about when the Yankees traded for Stanton, and it was Stanton, Judge, and Sanchez. Well, you just erased Sanchez for another S. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem with Giancarlo Stanton batting at 230. He produces power. He's right there in the middle of this lineup. But what I want for the Yankees moving forward is this. Listen, don't rush Garrett Cole back. You have a good record. You're at top. Again, it's going to be very hard to battle with Baltimore, but don't rush Garrett Cole back to get him go out there and prove quality innings. Luis Gil has done such a good job producing innings, getting outs. And to be honest with you, what he reminds me of, Eddie, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Yankees have a span of pitchers over the last few years. And of course, I know he was exclusively a Yankee, but over the stretch of even the bad era, right? The Yankees bring guys like Ivan Nova, who do great for the Yankees, don't do good anywhere else. Guys like Domingo Germán, who are on the cusp of ace discussions and then fall apart. I'm not saying he's going to be that guy, but in the case of Gil, is that he's been unhealthy, right? And he has a lot to prove. We could be talking about him being in a discussion down the road of being an ace, being that productive pitcher. But at the end of the day, right now, what you need him to do is continue being up here, pitching productive innings. And ultimately, that will decide if he deserves postseason innings or not. But what I desire for the Yankees is this. Garrett Cole comes back, you use a six-man rotation. You don't use a five. Let him get his starts. Let him get some rest days. He's not competing for anything anymore. We're not talking about a Cy Young. We're talking about your ace being ready for the postseason when it matters. Nestor Cortez has done a decent job. He came off to a very slow start. Clark Schmidt has shown improvements just as well as on the opposite side. Anthony Volpe, who was set up for disaster last season, has finally started to prime himself into a very solid leadoff hitter. The Yankees need another bat, though. And I'll say it like this. I still feel the Yankees' weakest position is third base. You get to the deadline time, I would love knowing Arenado. The realism is the Cardinals are still in the mix, and this is the true problem. If you remember last year, Eddie, right? I wrote about how the trade deadline was probably one of the weakest ones ever.
Yes.
What do you do this year, though? And granted, I know we have a long time to the deadline. But what do you do this year in the case where we're in June and every NL team still has a chance, even the Marlins and the Rockies. They're only 7 games out of a wild card. If you're in the NL East, you're not talking about a division championship at this point, unless you're the Braves and the Phillies. So you're talking about a wild card push. Everybody still has a chance. There's a below 500 team, again, being the Cardinals right now, being that third wild card team. That's going to create a very interesting discussion because the fact of the matter is, there's going to be, if this path continues, there's going to be a lot more buyers than there are sellers. So if you're the Yankees and you are serious, again, I hope Brian Cashman is serious about winning a championship because I believe this club, with what we are seeing, has the capability of earning it. I hope he's serious and understands that, listen, to get a superstar or get somebody that's an upgrade, you may have to give up a little bit. And listen, I'm not exactly one that wants to give up a guy like Anthony Rizzo, but if it was at a sacrifice of, let's say, getting a Pete Alonso, or if it was trading Alex Verdugo to get somebody else productive, I'm willing to do that if it means a championship. But everything has to come at the right price. And the fact of the matter is, for the New York Yankees, yeah, I do. I still feel you need maybe another pitcher as well to assume injuries. Yeah, the Yankees have been healthy to this point. They're historically unhealthy, but you need to continue adding to your depth and making yourself a threat if you're going to win the World Series. But I'm confident right now to say, unless things fall apart and everybody gets unhealthy, this team is a playoff caliber team. This team is a World Series caliber team, and it needs to continue proving that. And by the way, too, I want to emphasize, when you get towards the end of the season, you'll get guys like Jason Dominguez back after his injury, see where he is. What do you do with him? Because, again, you don't exactly have long-term commitments to.
And I do want to say that's coming sooner than later. I mean, he's been playing rehab games in Somerset last week. I was at a game Saturday night. He hit a bomb. He's like, he could be in the conversation by the end of this month to be ready back in the majors. And I think that creates a real question too with that outfield and, what happens with Alex Verdugo, for example. But, when you have a wealth of resources like that, you can't really complain. I do want to say, though, if the Mets somehow trade Pete Alonso to the Yankees, like you're suggesting, that picture's coming off the wall. I mean, if I know
What
there might be a chance
with him? And that's the problem. And for the record, Anthony Rizzo reminds me a lot of Mark Teixeira, outside the fact that he's not a switch hitter, because he's been reliable defensively. But to get somebody that has the star power of Pete Alonso, I would take him any time over Anthony Rizzo in that regard, because it's not just a big bat, but it's somebody who has proven time and time again that he actually can hit when it matters.
I agree with you. It's just if the Mets traded him to a rival, that would be insanity. But then again, I don't, at this point with this team, anything goes.
Well, absolutely anything goes. But the problem is that, again, we haven't established who's a seller and who isn't outside of the White Sox, and maybe, I can't even say the A's. But the point is maybe one team in the AL, maybe two. It's very lopsided this year. And I'm not saying the NL has weak teams. It's just how the start of the season has worked out, where some of the hotter teams, like the Pirates, again, have cooled down, and everybody's kind of still in the mix. The only team that hasn't come to life, still surprising, is our picks that we're going to win the World Series. That was the Houston Astros. The Astros have looked devastating. They're not good. But just like last year, and again, going back to my point about the deadline, and what I said on the article last year, was that, good teams, if you believe you're good, like the Mets and the Cardinals were last year, you weren't going to trade away your superstars because it was a one-time thing and you were going to come back. The Mets are, again, here below 500. Yeah, they kind of traded everybody away, right? But JD Martinez maybe can go somewhere. That there's a lot of things you can do. If you're the Cardinals, you're in a wild card push, you're below 500. I don't think you're going to trade away your best players if you're in a playoff position. In the AL side, if you're the Houston Astros, you just went from being World Series contender to now below 500. I don't think they're going to sell their best players by any means just because of one bad season. Now, I'm sure they'll trade some guys away, but they're not going to trade away their superstars. So it'll be a very, very interesting summer to follow here, moving forward in 2024 for baseball. But like I said, I'm confident in the Yankees. I'm confident in what I see. I'm just still not confident in Brian Cashman, but a World Series can change a lot of things, that's for sure. But we've got to get there first, and everybody staying healthy is the first step for what this team needs to do moving forward. And getting the right guys to get it done is what matters.
Well, I'm glad to see some positivity from you about your team for once. By the way, breaking news just as we're recording this, Ipe could be facing 33 years in prison. He's sentencing in October. So,
Okay.
yep,
Okay.
bye.
That's so forgettable to this point of the year.
I know,
It's
and especially with the new thing, like with Americano on the Padres getting banned for life from baseball today. I mean,
it feels so forgettable to this point about the whole gambling thing with Shohei at the start of the season that it almost feels like it wasn't even real. And for the Dodgers, they started the season off so slow, and then they picked it, up. And the NL West doesn't even feel real at this point. We're talking about the Diamondbacks who just made the World Series, and they're now one of baseball's worst teams. It's like the flip flopping in Major League Baseball is absolutely insane to think about of what we've seen over the last few seasons, and that anything could happen. I mean, again, not to keep on talking about the NL East, but what the Phillies are doing now is what they should have been doing last season and the season prior to that, not in 2024. So it's like a sense of progression is very interesting to follow Major League Baseball. But man, I don't know. It's been a very interesting year. It feels like eternity to this point. It's only June, the start of June, that is. So we've got a long way to go. But you're already starting to see game 7 moments and what teams can fit. And I'll tell you right now, the NL is going to be definitely an interesting one to watch. Right now, my pick, to be honest with you, if you're talking World Series, is probably Yankees Phillies again. And boy, oh boy, would I be devastated if the Yankees lost the World Series to the Phillies. I'll say that right now. I don't think I can last through that.
yeah, but we'll see. Because given the last couple of years with this new wild card format, who knows? We could end up with the Cardinals and Seattle or something with the way the playoffs go. So we'll see. But an exciting 2 months for sure that we've gotten through. So let's finish with this. Tim, you and I have very different opinions on this situation. NASCAR, IndyCar, what happened? For people who are watching this on Sports Speak Live, probably going to use this segment on motorsports today as well. But for people who watch this and don't know much about motorsports, Memorial Day weekend is considered the greatest weekend in racing. There's 3 races during the day: Monaco F1, IndyCar for Indianapolis, NASCAR at Charlotte, the Coke 600. Coke 600, many consider NASCAR's second biggest race. Indy 500 is IndyCar's biggest race. Over the years, there have been a few drivers who have attempted the double, which means they try to race the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 in the same day and complete all 1,100 miles. The only person who's ever been successful with that is Tony Stewart more than 2 decades ago. Nobody had attempted it in 10 years until Kyle Larson signed a 2-year deal with Arrow McLaren with support from Hendrick Motorsports that he would attempt to run the Indy 500 this year and next year, and then follow it up with the Coke 600. As everybody knows now, Indy 500 gets delayed by 4 hours. Rain happens. They don't start till 4:30. Coke 600 start happens while the Indy 500 is still going on. Larson finishes the race in 18th, had top 10 speed, ended up having a speeding penalty on pit road, ends up mid-pack, still wins Indy 500 Rookie of the Year, then tries to get over to Charlotte Motor Speedway. 200 laps into that race, he's about to land. They're past halfway. Rain starts falling. They delay the race. Many indications are they're going to restart it. And then decision comes from NASCAR. Nope, we're not going to restart it, even though the track looks like it's drying, because it's too humid on the track. So Kyle Larson never got in the car. Justin Allgaier ran the 5. So he was technically declared ineligible from the NASCAR playoffs at that point, because you have to compete in all 26 regular season races to be eligible unless you receive a waiver. Now, there's a history of drivers receiving waivers for several different reasons, and it usually happens pretty quickly. NASCAR drags its feet, goes through the entire week, races at Gateway, still no decision, and then finally, recording this on Tuesday this morning, Elton Sawyer makes the decision. So, Tim, we have very different opinions here. I am very pro waiver. You have some problems with the waiver situation. I'm going to share my side first here. Kyle Larson gave NASCAR unprecedented positive press and positive exposure by attempting the Indianapolis 500, which, I know you might differ, some fans might as well, but to me, the Indy 500 is a bigger race standalone than anything that NASCAR offers. Certainly the Coke 600, if you're going to compare apples to apples there. The Indianapolis 500 is a huge deal that anybody dreams to be in that 33 car field. And it's not just that that was Kyle Larson's desire. It's the fact that NASCAR promoted his running of this double so heavily, so intently that the week before at the All-Star race, they're showing the plane coming in with him trying to get to North Wilkesboro, and you're promoting it for months, literally, that Kyle Larson is doing this. And you choose as a sport to not try to restart that race because it's too late, allegedly, at Charlotte, even though you ran the Xfinity race middle of the night, basically a year before at the same track. And that was on a weeknight versus the night before Memorial Day. And, NASCAR has shown the flexibility to run big races late before, number one. Number two, Kyle Larson, the big draw to try to get that race restarted was so he could at least say he competed in both events, and you don't give him that opportunity. And then to make matters worse, you hold him in flux for a week and a half that he might not be eligible for the playoffs. Kyle Larson is maybe NASCAR's most talented driver right now, maybe their most marketable figure right now. And to deny him a chance to race for the championship would be a disaster. I know the waiver system existing at all is controversial, and I don't disagree with that. But based on the precedent set, the fact that Chase Elliott and Johnny Sauter have gotten NASCAR playoff waivers before after being suspended by the sport for wrecking competitors before, yet they're given access to the playoffs. Kyle Larson, who ran a race that NASCAR heavily promoted, has allowed people to do in the past, and made every effort to get back to Charlotte in a speedy fashion so he could get in the car, only to be denied a chance to race, would have been completely unfair. So I am very happy that NASCAR made this decision to give Kyle Larson the waiver and allow him to compete for a championship that he has a very good chance to win. So that's my tangent. That's my thought. Tim, I know you have the other side here.
I don't exactly disagree about Kyle Larson getting a waiver. What I disagree with in NASCAR's end is the fact that the rule book is very, very gray. Because if you look at past scenarios of recency, right? You talk about Chase Elliott getting suspended. I agree in regards to suspension. I don't know if that should grant you a playoff waiver. But when you talk about other things, right? When you're talking about racing in NASCAR and injuries, it's a very touchy subject because, for example, it can go both ways. Tony Stewart and Chase Elliott get hurt doing extracurricular activities that had nothing to do with NASCAR. Tony Stewart being dune buggying, and Chase Elliott also last season was snowboarding on his time off. They get hurt, they miss races, they end up getting playoff eligibility granted to them. I don't agree with that. The rule is put in place to intend to protect those drivers who either A, get injured or those from exploiting the system so that, for example, a driver like Shane Van Gisbergen, who won last season at the Chicago Street Course, doesn't end up making his way into the playoffs via a win-and-you're-in system. Where NASCAR has fault is because last season and going into this season, they took away the points minimum finishing spot for you to qualify to be championship eligible if you win a race. Which, yes, NASCAR has a lot less drivers now than they did back then, but it's still ridiculous to the fact that you make that rule but still have this waiver still exist. Another example, Alex Bowman gets hurt dirt racing. I feel very down the middle on that, not because he's my favorite driver, but because technically he was following contractual obligations through Ally, which is a Hendrick Motorsports sponsor, to go out there and race a dirt car where he ultimately gets hurt. Does that grant a waiver? It's 50-50. To me, though, that's more reasonable because it's not just bettering his racing craft, but it's also representing NASCAR and his sponsors. That's where I feel it's very indifferent about. If Kyle Larson raced the Indy 500 and got hurt in the Indy 500, representing NASCAR, might I add, I would say yes, he should be granted a waiver. But in this case, on that given night, whether you agree with it or not, Kyle Larson, whoever made the decision, chose to stay in Indianapolis to choose the Indianapolis 500, which I'm not disagreeing, Eddie, by the way, is the bigger race of the two. but he chose that over his contractual obligation to come race in the Coke 600. And based on NASCAR's recency, yes, he got a waiver, but the rule book doesn't say that. The rule book doesn't specify. And here's my problem again, moving forward. NASCAR could simply just abolish this. If you eliminate win and you're in, you don't have to worry about this. Kyle Larson is very easily a playoff deserving contender and a current championship contender. He missed a race, and granted, he didn't get the points last week, but he missed a race and was still less than 10 points out of a championship lead, with that being said. Larson made his effort. He got Charlotte. NASCAR chose to not continue the race. I still personally believe, and I'm not trying to speculate, but I truthfully believe that Fox had something to do with it still to this day.
Yeah.
Because it's ridiculous to sit in the crowd and watch a track dry. I was there for an hour and a half, watch actual progress being made. Drivers telling you they thought they were going to get ready to get called in their cars within 15 minutes and for them to overturn. And if that's the case for Fox, listen, I understand you're frustrated because you're losing races and money, but you should not take it out on your fans, especially your broadcast crew that, might I remind you, was covering its potential last ever Coke 600 on your channel. Especially the fact that all those workers did the invocation at the start of the race. Let's not forget about that either. But that's not what we're talking about. The point is this. NASCAR eliminates win and you're in. There's no need for that rule, right? If NASCAR turns around and they want to upgrade the rule and keep when you're in, here's my thing. Mention the specific events guys can do. Because Joey Logano, again, I keep on bringing him up because he brought up a very good point. What happens if, I'm cleared to race in NASCAR, but I just simply still don't feel good and I don't want to show up? NASCAR's not going to give me a waiver. What if I want to go race the super late model race? NASCAR's not going to give me a waiver. So realistically speaking, and I would argue, what if JJ Yaley went and wanted to go race at Monaco? Wouldn't get back in time based on time differences, right? So would they grant him a waiver? Maybe, just because it's the event, which is my point, that it feels like it's subjective to who it is, Eddie, right? It's Kyle Larson. You've got to. If it was anybody else, I don't know. But NASCAR needs to specify the events that can be the exception. Because you talk about the rumor of, hey, maybe Ryan Blaney doing the double or a couple other guys from IndyCar, right? It's something that's not just entertaining, but it opens eyes to the sport because people want to watch it happen. Viewership numbers jumped up on both sides for a reason. People have interest in it. All NASCAR has to do is say, hey, here it is, black and white. You can miss if you don't make it back to the start of the race in these scenarios for these events, A, B, C, and D, let's say, then that's okay. That's fine. They have down the rule book. And they're going to have to change the rules. But where I just fully disagree is that, listen, again, I want to see Kyle Larson win a championship. I want to see him go out there and prove every week why he is the best driver in NASCAR and the best driver in this sport of auto racing. But at the end of the day, the rule book didn't specify that. The rule book doesn't protect Kyle Larson of that, which is why he shouldn't have been granted a waiver. But here we are granting him a waiver. But I'm not going to act like he's the only one that hasn't undeservedly got a waiver, if that makes sense, based on the rule book, which is, again, where I disagree.
Fair enough. I agree with some of your points, and I understand the contractual obligation argument. But, we got to remember, too, the contract that Kyle Larson is under is a partnership that Hendrick Motorsports and Arrow McLaren signed to make this thing happen. And you mentioned the viewership jumps from both sides. A lot of IndyCar fans were suddenly invested in this NASCAR race. But I agree with you. The two outstanding problems here are, number one, the fact that Fox pretty clearly dictated the fact that they didn't want to restart this race when they were fans of NASCAR and IndyCar who wanted to see that race finished. Number one, just because it's a big race. Number two, because you want to see a race to its distance at one of NASCAR's best tracks. And also number three, the fact that you wanted to see Kyle Larson get in that car and say he at least got to drive both cars in the same day and make the most of what was a tough situation. But I'll wrap up this episode with this. I 100% agree with you. The waiver system is ridiculous. There are a lot of things with NASCAR that people have issues with that are more so than me because I'm a younger fan. And frankly, I've watched 13 years of this sport. 10 of them have been done with the elimination style playoff format. And I have no problem with that. I've warmed up to stages and don't have too much of an issue with that either. But get rid of winning you're in. Like Austin Cindric, all the credit in the world to him. He gets a win. He needed it. He should not get into the playoffs because his teammate ran out of gas. I mean, it's simple as that. You should have to be in the top 16 in points. If you want to go from there with playoff points and stage points and then have eliminations in the playoffs, and even if you do win and you're in then into future rounds to make it about having a clutch moment in the playoffs and add some storylines and drama, I'm okay with that. But putting people like Austin Cindric and Daniel Suarez in the playoffs this year, and I mean, the laundry list goes on and on over the past few years. Like Michael McDowell in 2021, when Front Row Motorsports was still close to a backmarker team, should not have been in the competing for a championship over deserving drivers because he lucked into a win in the Daytona 500. That just shouldn't be happening. I'll leave it at that. But that'll do it for this episode of Sports Speak Live, episode 177. Next week, NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals, they'll be underway. We can talk about that, some baseball probably as well. So you can wait for that as well. If you haven't checked out our Ball Knower Showdown episode from last week, congratulations to Vinny and Miniker for winning our second installment. We'll have another one coming later this summer. A lot of fun plans coming up over the next couple of months as well, so you want to stay in tune for that. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off of Sports Speak Live, episode 177. We'll talk to you next week.